helps in the resolution of ethical dilemmas. Okay, so whenever an individual is facing an ethical dilemma, then these theories guide the individuals to take the right course of action. Okay. See, whenever, what is an ethical dilemma? Right versus right conflict. So it's a conflict between two rights or two wrongs. So whenever an individual is facing an ethical dilemma, there are two choices. Yesterday we discussed either resolving that dilemma through moral intuition and using common sense, or through normative ethical theories. Now, for simpler cases, for simpler situations where you clearly know that at this point in time this value is more important than this value, you can come out of the dilemma using your moral intuition. For example, say if a murderer is asking you the address of his potential victim, then there is a conflict. There is a conflict between truthfulness versus beneficence. Beneficence means doing good to others. Okay. So whether it's an ethical dilemma because it's a conflict between two rights, whether you be truthful and tell So whether you be truthful and tell him the address of the potential victim, or in the larger interest of that person you lie. Now it's a very simple ethical dilemma. Here, doing good to that person, saving that person's life is more important than being truthful. Okay, so it's a very simple dilemma. You can come out of the dilemma using your common sense, using your moral intuition. But generally in life, the situations would be much more complex, where you won't be able to come out of the dilemma using your common sense or using your intuition. So in such situations, ethical theories or normative ethical theories guide us how to resolve the dilemma. Now, whenever we are facing an ethical dilemma, we have to undergo the process of ethical reasoning. Okay, ethical reasoning is the process which is to be used whenever confronted with an ethical dilemma. Whenever confronted with an ethical dilemma. Ethical reasoning has four components. The ethical dilemma whenever you are facing an ethical dilemma, you have to undergo the process of ethical reasoning. Ethical reasoning has four components: ethical sensitivity, ethical judgment, ethical choice, and ethical character. Okay. The first thing is ethical sensitivity. What does ethical sensitivity mean? It means the ability to identify a situation of ethical dilemma. Ethical sensitivity means the ability to identify a situation of ethical dilemma. Okay, so many times we do not realize that we are facing a dilemma. For instance, in India, using official resources or public resources for private purpose is very common. Okay, using your official car or your official help, official peon or anything, any official resource for private purposes, it is very common. And while using it, we do not even consider that it is something which is not wrong. Giving favors to your friends or family or using your official car for shopping, etc., we do not consider it as wrong. And we do not consider that there is an ethical dilemma in using official resources for personal purpose. Are you understanding? So we do not have the ethical sensitivity. We are not able to identify a situation. We are not able to identify a situation of ethical dilemma. Are you understanding? कि हमारा वो sensitivity ही develop नहीं हुआ. We haven't been able to develop that sensitivity to realize that there is something wrong in it. There is an ethical dilemma in what we are doing. Okay. So the first step towards resolution of ethical dilemma is, first of all, you need to know that there is an ethical dilemma. Okay. So that we know through ethical sensitivity. Second, once you know that, okay, I am facing an ethical dilemma, the next thing what you need to do is ethical judgment. So as part of ethical judgment, what you do, you basically generate different alternatives and do cost benefit analysis of different options before you. Okay, that this is the ethical dilemma that I am facing. These are the various options that I have. These are the merits and demerits of each of the options. Okay, this entire process is known as ethical judgment, generating different alternatives and doing cost benefit analysis of different alternatives. Okay, ethical choice is then choosing the best course of action, choosing the most ethical option. Okay. In these two steps, in ethical judgment and in ethical choice, we use normative ethical theories. When we are analyzing different alternatives and when we are choosing the best course of action, okay, we basically refer to normative ethics, normative ethical theories. So normative ethics guide us in analyzing different options and in choosing the best course of action. Okay. And finally, we have ethical character. What is ethical character? Ethical character is the courage to persist with the ethical path or with the ethical action. It is the courage to persist with the ethical action in spite of temptation to take the easy way out. In spite of temptation to take the easy way out. Okay. Now many times what happens is that, see, most of us know what is good, what is bad, what is right, what is wrong. Okay. But we are not able to implement it. Okay. For example, in Mahabharata, okay, Duryodhan tells to Lord Krishna that I know dharma, but I fail to follow it, and I know adharma, but I fail to withdraw from it. Okay, so most of us know what is dharma, what is adharma, what is good, what is bad, what is right, what is wrong. It's not a question of our knowledge. It's a question of whether we are able to implement that knowledge. So that is where ethical character comes into the picture. Courageous persistence despite the temptation to take the easy way out. So many times we know that this is the wrong thing to do, then also we do it because of lack of ethical character. Principally we are against corruption, but if we are facing an urgent situation and we are required to pay a bribe, then we pay the bribe. Okay. So again, it shows lack of ethical character. Okay. So again, basically ethical character means implementation and courageous persistence. Okay. Despite the temptation to take the unethical path, to take the easier way out. Clear? So whenever you are facing an ethical dilemma, you will have to undergo the process of ethical reasoning and you will have to undergo all these four steps. Now let us come to normative ethics, normative ethical theories. The first theory that we are going to discuss is teleological theory. Teleological theory or consequentialism. Teleological theory or consequentialism. This theory believes that the moral worth of an action, is determined by the consequences of the action. Okay, the moral worth of an action is determined by the consequences of the action. That is, ends justify the means. That is, ends justify the means. Now, teleo means ends. Teleo का मतलब होता है ends. That's why teleological theory. Okay. There are three different forms of consequentialism. There are three sub-theories within consequentialism: ethical egoism, act utilitarianism, and rule utilitarianism. So पहला है ethical egoism. Ethical egoism believes that the moral worth of an action is determined by the consequences of action only on oneself. So whenever, as per the supporters of ethical egoism, whenever we have to assess the morality of an action, we should basically assess what are the consequences of that action for us, for me. If I am the decision maker, I will just assess the consequences of whatever I am doing on myself. Okay, so ethical egoism is essentially based on the philosophy of psychological egoism, which we discussed as part of ethical skepticism. So again, the supporters of ethical egoism, they believe that human beings are inherently selfish. There is no such thing as a selfless act. Okay, and the only objective, like human beings always try to maximize their self-interest. And whenever there would be a conflict, whenever there is a conflict between self-interest and larger public good, larger public interest, self-interest would prevail. Okay, that is what ethical egoists or psychological egoists believe. Okay, again, this view has been rejected. Okay, as far as examination is concerned, you do not have to subscribe to this view. Okay. Then we have utilitarianism. Second sub-theory that is within consequentialism is utilitarianism or act utilitarianism. When we say utilitarianism, it means act utilitarianism. This theory believes that the moral worth of an action moral worth of an action is determined by the overall consequences or outcomes of the action. By the overall consequences or outcomes of the action. Okay, so basically in act utilitarianism, the interests of all the stakeholders are given equal weightage. Okay, so if I am taking a decision which has an impact on 5 of us, then the weightage of the interest of all 5 of us would be given like equal footing. Okay, I am not just concerned about consequences on myself, but consequences for all people, for all stakeholders who are affected by my decision. That is the difference between act utilitarianism and ethical egoism. Okay, so basically act utilitarianism tries to bring about greatest good for the greatest number of people. The underlying essence of act utilitarianism is to bring about greatest good for the greatest number of people. Ends justify the means. Okay. Now the problem with act utilitarianism is that it can be misused. Okay. It can be used to justify even unethical acts such as cheating, stealing, by saying that a lot of people are benefiting from it. Cheating क्यों कर रहे हैं? सबका भला होगा. All the people would be benefited. Yeah, stealing. Why are you stealing? I'm going to distribute whatever I'm stealing to the poor people. I'm trying to bring about greatest good for the greatest number of people. So act utilitarianism can be misused. Okay. To do certain unethical activities. That's why act utilitarianism has been refined in the form of rule utilitarianism. Rule utilitarianism expands the focus of moral deliberation Rule utilitarianism expands the focus of moral deliberation by asking 2 questions. First, what are the long-term consequences of my action? What are the long-term consequences of my action? Second, what will happen if everybody as a rule what will happen if everybody as a rule start acting in a similar way? Okay, so rule utilitarianism में we ask 2 questions. To assess the morality of any action, we ask 2 questions. Okay, what are the long-term consequences? Not just the short-term, but what are the long-term consequences of my action? And second, what will happen if what I am doing, everybody as a rule starts doing the same thing? Then what will happen? Okay.
By considering utilitarianism theory.
Yeah, this is within utilitarianism. That you justify, you are focusing on the consequences of the action. But just focusing on the consequences, just trying to bring about greatest good for the greatest number of people might be problematic because it might be misused. So in addition to focusing on the consequences, you ask these 2 questions and then you assess the morality of the action, whether the action is more moral or ethical or not. Okay. So rule utilitarianism then can be used to check unethical activities such as cheating, stealing. In the like stealing, for example, and act utilitarianism can be used to justify it. But when you ask these 2 questions, what are the long-term consequences? In the short term, you will steal and you will distribute it to the poor people. But in the long term, what will happen? Nothing, no sustainable change will be brought about. Okay, they will consume that money in few days. Second is, what will happen if everybody starts doing the same thing? What will happen if everybody starts stealing and distributing money to the poor? What will happen? Entropy, chaos. है ना? So again, whenever you have to assess the morality of any action, ask these two questions as part of rule utilitarianism. Okay. That there is a case. You heard of this? Few years back, there was this person named Aaron Swartz. Have you heard of his name? Aaron Swartz. So he was an ethical hacker, internet hacktivist, in US, and in fact he was the brain behind RSS. RSS feeds जो आपको आते हैं ना, rich sites only. Okay, he was the person who was instrumental behind developing RSS feeds. So what he did, that he believed that there are various research publications. For example, JSTOR, JSTOR, it's a very famous research publication. And in order to access their research publications, you have to pay an online fee. And only when you pay an online fee, then only you can access their research papers, etc. So he wanted to bring about freedom of information on the internet. And he did not agree with this policy of these research publications that you should be able to access their papers only by paying a fee. So what he did, he hacked into their website and made all publications accessible to the people. Okay. Then he was tried under US violation of IPR laws. It's a violation of intellectual property right, and hacking into the content of some entity and making it public. Okay. And when he was being tried, he committed suicide. Okay, because of public humiliation or whatever. So you might get a case in ethics wherein basically the subject matter or the person is breaking some law, trying to bring about larger good. The objective is that what was he trying to do? He was trying to bring about greatest good for the greatest number of people. How? By stealing, by hacking. So you might get a similar case, wherein in the case the intention is noble, you want to help the people, but you are violating the rule of law for that. Okay. So there you cannot support such activities. In the case, you cannot support such activities in spite of the noble intentions. Okay. You will reject what he did by invoking rule utilitarianism. First of all, what are the long-term consequences of what he was doing? Okay, he hacked into one website and then made their research publications open. Okay, but in the long term, does it bring about any sustainable change? Is any sustainable change going to be brought by this? Nothing. Only those publications will be available. Secondly, what will happen if everybody start hacking? There will be no research and development. R&D and innovation will stop because IPR is needed for encouraging R&D and innovation. Okay. What he should have done? He should have used all legitimate means. For example, he should have created popular opinion against what these research publications are doing. He should have created bottom-up pressure so that these publications are forced to change their policy, or government, he could have persuaded the government to pay for these publications. Are you understand? So there are various other legitimate means which he could have used. He could have approached the judiciary, he could have gone to the government, he could have talked to the ministers and the elected representatives. The fact that these research publications are charging such a hefty sum, it's not in larger public interest, then a policy change would have been brought about which would have been a sustainable change. Instead of focusing on those things, he did something which was illegal. Okay. So you might get a case in ethics like that. Okay. And then you can quote rule utilitarianism. Okay.
So this can be unethical, illegal.
Unethical, illegal. Although it's definitely illegal, the ethics is something which is debatable. The ethical part is something which is debatable because the intention is not personal benefit. And he did not want to do something for personal monetary benefit or any pecuniary gain. The intention was to cause greatest good for the greatest number of people. But again, what were the means that he adopted? That was unethical. Okay. Yeah. Next is problems with consequentialism or utilitarianism. So we have discussed consequentialism. In fact, problems with utilitarianism. What are the problems with utilitarianism as a theory? Okay, utilitarianism as a normative ethical theory, what are the problems? First, how to determine the consequences of one's action? How to determine the consequences of one's action? If our action does not promote or does not produce, if our action does not produce greatest good for the greatest number of people, greatest good for the greatest number of people, should the moral agent be blamed? Should the moral agent be blamed? Okay. Now, in utilitarianism, the moral worth of the action is determined by the consequences of the action. Okay. But how to determine the consequences of our action? Many times, we imagine that, okay, if I do this, it will lead to this. But if those outcomes are not achieved, can the moral agent be blamed in spite of the noble intentions? Are you understanding? For example, nowadays it has become very fashionable to criticize Jawaharlal Nehru. Okay. So Jawaharlal Nehru is generally blamed for all the problems that we are facing, the kind of development model that we adopted. What kind of development model we adopted after our independence? Yeah, we adopted a mixed economy with public sector controlling the commanding heights of the economy, state controlling the commanding heights of the economy. There was public sector monopoly, license quota permit raj system, okay, etc. As part of the planning, if you have read about the planning process in India, the second plan was known as Nehru Maharaja plan, okay, which focused on industrial development of heavy industries, basic industries as the key to economic growth. Okay. Now, by 1980s, it was realized that that model did not work. Okay, and that's why we had, it's like one of the reasons for introduction of economic reforms, liberalization of the economy. Now, in hindsight, many of us blame Nehru for whatever happened from 50s to 80s. That it was Nehru who adopted that model, state-led model of development or public sector monopoly-led model of development. And because of that, India, there was economic stagnation and there was poverty in India. Okay. However, one needs to, when we are assessing what Nehru did, it needs to be assessed in the context in which what he did. Okay. At that time, we did not have any other option. Because the socialist was, first of all, on the one hand, the Soviet Union model was functioning very well. And the Soviet Union had emerged as one of the major industrialized countries of the world at that time, in the 1940s. Okay. And on the other, the Western countries who had adopted like capitalistic system, they were facing the Great Depression. Yeah, which continued till 1940s. Okay. Plus, after independence, the private sector was not developed in India. They just did not have the capacity to make the kind of investments which was needed. Okay, so keeping all these factors in mind, Nehru did not have any other option but to choose the economic development model that he chose. So it is very easy to blame him now, after 40, 50, 60 years, that okay, what he did was wrong and because of him, India could not progress or India could not develop, he is responsible for our poverty and economic stagnation, etc. But again, can a moral, his intention was good, his intention was to bring about greatest good for the greatest number of people. So can a moral agent be blamed if the consequences are not as envisaged? Are you understanding? This is the problem with consequentialism or utilitarianism. First problem. Second, in theory, second problem क्या है? In theory, the moral agent should give equal weightage. In theory, the moral agent should give equal weightage to the interest of all stakeholders. Equal weightage to the interest of all stakeholders. But in practice, the moral agent might try to, but in practice, the moral agent might try to maximize its self-interest.
Maximum his or
Its. But in practice, the moral agent might try to maximize its self-interest on the pretext of producing greatest good. On the pretext of producing greatest good. Thus, on a slippery slope, utilitarianism might degenerate into ethical egoism. Okay, what does this mean? What we are saying that as per utilitarianism, the interest of all stakeholders should be given equal weightage. Whenever we are deciding the morality of any action, we should determine what will be the consequences of my action on all the stakeholders, and their interest should be given equal weightage. But in practice, what happens? The decision maker or the moral agent gives more weightage to its own self-interest. Okay, and therefore utilitarianism degenerates into ethical egoism. Okay, a very good example of this is USA's foreign policy. Okay, so whatever USA does, what does it say? अमेरिका फर्स्ट तो अभी आया ट्रम्प के आने के बाद, है ना? पहले ट्रेडिशनली whatever USA has been doing, है ना, it has been justifying its actions by saying that it is in the larger good of humanity. All its foreign military, yesterday we talked about foreign military interventions, R2P, responsibility to protect, and USA has intervened militarily in a number of countries and tried to bring about coercive regime change, है ना? Syria, Libya, various other countries. And what was the justification that it gave? It is in the best interest of people of those countries, because those are authoritarian regimes who are exploiting the people So to protect human rights or to bring about democracy in those countries, USA justifies its action. Similarly, USA's economic philosophy or economic policies. Okay. USA के multinational corporations, they have been accused of exploiting a number of African, Latin American, Asian countries. Okay. However, USA justified those things by saying that it is in the best interest of that country. Our MNCs are going to bring about development in those countries. However, in practice, those MNCs enter there and then they exploit their resources. Okay, and the people are not benefited. So whatever USA does, it tries to justify it by saying that it is in the larger interest of humanity, it is trying to bring about greatest good for the greatest number of people. But in practice, what it is trying to do, it is trying to protect its own self-interest. So utilitarianism has degenerated into ethical egoism. Okay. In fact, there is a very good book called Confessions of an Economic Hitman. Okay, it has been written by a USA bureaucrat, and that book very vividly sort of describes how USA multinational corporations have exploited different African countries. USA के जो mining corporations, है ना, mining and petroleum refinery corporations, they entered a number of African countries on the pretext of bringing about development there. But they collaborated with the dictators there and looted the country. Okay. Confessions of an Economic Hitman. Okay. Finally, the last issue with utilitarianism is that it ignores the fact that ends do not justify means always. Utilitarianism ignores the fact that ends do not justify the means always. There are certain actions which are right or wrong. There are certain actions which are right or wrong, irrespective of the consequences. Okay? कि utilitarianism के according, every action is to be assessed on the basis of consequences. That is, ends justify the means. However, in practice, there are certain actions which are intrinsically right or which are intrinsically wrong irrespective of the consequences. Ends do not justify the means always. Okay. So these are the issues with utilitarianism as a normative ethical theory, as an ethical philosophy. Okay?
So any examples of that?
Ends do not justify the means always. Yeah. So, for example, foreign military interventions. This can be talked about. Okay. Now, again, you might try to justify foreign military interventions by saying that it is in the larger interest of the people. You are trying to protect human rights. But again, foreign military interventions and violating the sovereignty of any nation, it is intrinsically wrong. Are you understanding?
So in the second point, it is considering 2 points: slippery slope theory and also ethical egoism.
Yeah, we have used slippery slope theory to as a tool to highlight an issue with utilitarianism. Utilitarianism basically
Means whatever the ethical egoism will lead to.
Utilitarianism will regress into ethical egoism. It's a slippery slope. So you are claiming that you are following utilitarianism, but in practice you slip on the slope and you reach ethical egoism. Okay? Okay, so this was the first theory, teleological theory, consequentialism. It had three subparts: ethical egoism, act utilitarianism, and rule utilitarianism. Okay? As far as examination is concerned, rule utilitarianism is the most important. That is something that can be quoted at a lot of places. You have to reject ethical egoism, and there are issues with act utilitarianism. Okay, rule utilitarianism is most useful for examination. Second theory is deontology. पहला was teleology. Second is deontology. Deontology means duty. Deon means duty. Okay. So deontology is duty-based ethics or rule-based ethics. Okay, duty-based ethics or rule-based ethics. So this theory believes that the moral worth of an action is determined by the nature of the action itself. The moral worth of an action is determined by the nature of the action itself and not the consequences of the action. That is, certain actions are right or wrong irrespective of the outcomes. So, according to deontologists, according to supporters of deontology, decisions should be taken according to supporters of deontology, decisions should be taken on the basis of disinterested will of the person. Take it. On the basis of disinterested will of the person. Whatever using rationality and logic, disinterested will of the person using rationality and logic. Whatever the cost or consequences turn out to be. Whatever the cost or consequences turn out to be. Okay? So the supporters of deontology वो क्या कहते हैं कि any decision should be taken on the basis of disinterested will. What does disinterested will mean? Disinterested means dispassionate. Okay, where emotions are not involved. Okay, so decisions should be taken on the basis of rationality and logic, and not on the basis of extra rational factors. And rationality basically says that we should not focus on consequences of the action. We should just focus on the intrinsic nature of the action. Okay. Now there are two versions of deontology. Deontology हम लोग बात करते हैं. There are two sub-theories or versions. First is Immanuel Kant's categorical imperative. Okay, so we have two versions of deontology. पहला है Immanuel Kant's theory of categorical imperative. You have heard of Immanuel Kant? Immanuel Kant का नाम सुना है? He was a German philosopher. Okay. So he came out with his concept of categorical imperative. Okay. Categorical imperative means absolute unambiguous and unconditional obligation to follow one's duty absolute, unambiguous and unconditional obligation to follow one's duty under all circumstances. Okay, so basically again, Immanuel Kant said that if we concern ourselves with consequences, then we would be tempted to act in our own benefit. Okay, जब भी हम consequences का बात करेंगे, then we would start giving more importance to consequences for us rather than consequences for everybody. So we will be tempted to act in our own benefit. Therefore, a rational human being should not think about the consequences. They should take decision on the basis of disinterested will of the person. Okay, using rationality and logic. Disinterested will means dispassionately. Whenever you are taking a decision, you should not allow extra rational factors. See, decision making involves two sets of factors, rational factors and extra rational factors. Okay? So, Immanuel Kant said that decision should be taken on the basis of disinterested will. That is, only rational factors should be allowed to influence our decision making process. Extra rational factors क्या होते हैं? Emotions, sentiments, traditions, customs, intuition, hunch. Many times we take a decision, we do not have any rational justification for it. We just say that, okay, I feel like this is the right thing to do. All these are extra rational factors. Now, Kant says that whenever we allow extra rational factors to influence our decision, then we would be tempted to act in our own benefit. Are you understanding? So that's why we should stick to rationality and logic. Only rational factors, only disinterested will. The literal meaning of disinterested is dispassionate. Okay. Then we would take decision just on the basis of the nature of the decision, or we would give more importance to the nature of the action itself, and we would not concern ourselves with the consequences. Clear? Okay. So this is Kant's idea of categorical imperative. It is the absolute and unconditional obligation of every human being to follow one's duty under all circumstances, irrespective of the consequences. Okay? There are two principles of categorical imperative. There are two principles of categorical imperative. First, universal law principle. Universal law principle. It says that act on the maxim that you will to become a universal law. That you will, W-I-L-L. Act on the maxim that you will to become a universal law. Will means यहाँ पर you are willing to make it a universal law. Okay? And second is end in itself principle. End in itself principle or the respect principle. Respect principle. End in itself or the respect principle. This principle believes that human beings should be treated as end in themselves. Human beings should be treated as end in themselves and not as a means to achieve something else. And not as a means to achieve something else. That is, they should be treated with dignity and autonomy. They should be treated with dignity and autonomy. Human beings should be treated as end in themselves, as not as a means to achieve something else. That is, they should be treated with dignity and autonomy. Okay. So, पहला principle क्या है categorical imperative का? That is the universal law principle. What does it say? It says that act on the maxim. Maxim means principle, rule. Act on the maxim that you will to become a universal law. Okay. So basically it means that you should only do those things that you are willing, that you would like. If others do it, then you will not find it objectionable. And that you will to become a universal law. If whatever you are doing, if it becomes a universal law, you won't have any problem with it. Okay. So basically the essence of this principle is that do not do unto others what you would not like others to do unto you. Are you understanding? If you do not like some behavior from others, you should ensure that you are not doing the same thing. For example, if you do not want others to jump the red light, okay, and we want it to become the universal law, then we should also not jump the red light ourselves. Are you understand? Act on the maxim that you will to become a universal law. Okay? If you want it to become a universal law, if you want everybody to follow it, okay, then you also follow. It's another way of saying be the change that you want to see in the world. Okay? So Kant had said it in this way, Gandhi told it in a different language. And the second principle is the respect or end in itself principle. That human beings should be treated as end in themselves and not as a means to achieve something else. That is, they should be treated with dignity and autonomy. Okay, for example, again, this principle is valid both in personal as well as professional life. And generally in personal and professional life, we use human beings as a ladder to achieve something else. For example, we make friends only with those people who we think that are going to benefit us in the future. I understand. So we use them as a means to achieve something else rather than just having friendship without any reason. Similarly, in the professional context, in the organizational context, what kind of example can you give? In government organizations which are based on hierarchy, generally we have a tendency to be very courteous and polite with our seniors, but when it comes to our subordinates, okay, we are generally very rude or we are indifferent. And this is especially relevant in government organizations because in government organizations the hierarchy is very strong. Okay, so basically if we go to follow this principle, the end in itself or the respect principle, okay, the respect that we give to our superiors because they are writing our APAR annual performance appraisal report, the same respect should be given to our subordinates also, although we won't get anything in return from them. Are you understand? So basically see, like whatever limited experience I have had working in the government, whenever you try to dominate others, and whenever you try to give orders to your subordinates, and they will sort of accept those orders on your face because you are their boss. But in the medium to long run, they are not going to implement those things. Are you understand? So always the focus should be on winning their hearts and minds instead of exercising your authority on the basis of domination and command. Okay? And doing simple things. And you don't need to do anything extraordinary. Doing simple things, smiling at them, wishing them back when they wish you, asking about their family members, how are their children, how are their family members. And these छोटी-छोटी चीजें, they go a long way in building relationships with them. See, you have to earn their respect. You have to earn their respect. You cannot command their respect. On their face, they will respect you. They will show that they are respecting you because you are at a higher position. But it won't come from inside. If you do not treat them with dignity and autonomy. So that is the meaning of this respect principle. In our personal life as well as in professional life, okay, we should treat them with dignity and autonomy as end in themselves, and not as a means to achieve something else. So even those people who we know are of no use to us. They are not going to benefit us in the future. We should see our character. That is where the real character comes out. How we treat people who are not going to be used to us. We all treat those people who are going to be useful to us very respectfully because we know that tomorrow we might need them. That is not the test of character. The test of character comes depending on how you treat those people who are not of any use to you, who are not going to benefit you in any manner. Okay, so this is what end in itself principle or the respect principle is about. Okay? And we'll stop today. We will continue with mathematical theories tomorrow, and then we will start with human values. हाँ, अभी तो चाहिए. अभी तो manual can't be covered, categorical imperative. Tomorrow we'll continue with here, long terms.